build a community-driven makerspace. I know that some of you might not be from a library setting, and it's okay. There are a lot of the pieces and tools we've heard others have used. I mean, we're going to talk in the context of libraries, but know that a lot of information we're going to talk about can be used in museums and other cultural centers too. And we want to make this interactive. So if you have other ideas along the way too, please feel free to type in the chat, raise your hand, things like that. Happy to interact. But we have to thank IMLS, who's a funder of our project and is enabling this work to continue to happen. So here are the people talking today, and we're here on Zoom. Both Pam and myself have a consulting business, and we were the project director and manager for the Makers in the Library project, and for this new IMLS grant, which we're going to talk a little bit about today as well. And we're just so excited to be here and hear from all of you as well. So it's always can be a little strange being in this tech setting. We had our music going and things, but know that we're real people. We're real people behind these screens. We're here. Please interact with us. Let us know you're here. Talk to us in the chat. If you have, it's a smaller group in this breakout time. We'll try to leave some time for Q&A at the end, but if you have a question, just type it in the chat or raise your hand. We'd love to hear from you. And we're going to have times that we'll put up this slide called Let's Chat, where we'll give you a prompt that would really like to hear from you and encourage you to respond in the chat box.
Yeah.
And we're going to start with one of those. So let's chat. We want to hear from you. I know Pam asked a bit about where you're from, but we also want to hear from you about what's the first thing that you think of when you hear the word makerspace? What's that first word or phrase that comes to mind when you think of the word makerspace? I see creativity, a play space for all ages. I see some tech pieces, CNC and 3D printing, innovation, materials, fun, practical play, love that. Technology again, entrepreneurship, cool projects, education, exploration, community. I love that. Yeah, we're all about community-driven spaces. 3D printing again, hands-on. Yes, yes, yes. So thank you for that. Yes, we a space for learning new skills. Oh, I saw courage, sharing. These are all great words, and it sounds like we're talking to a crowd that already thinks very similarly. Pam, you and I. I know I like courage too. Thank you for that one. That was a good one. Because when we think of the term makerspace, we really focus on the people, and that's what we're going to talk about a lot in our toolkit and our model. That it's not about the physical space; it's about the people and the mindset of the people that really make a makerspace what it is. And you've got a lot of great new words. We're going to have to save this chat that we can add to our list here of bulleted words. But here's some that we think of that makers are curious, they're playful. We saw hands-on in that list a lot. They're resourceful, self-directed, persistent. They learn from their failures and mistakes. They collaborative. We learn from each other. Sharing, we saw in the chat. Willing to share ideas, problem solvers. You're focused on the process, not just that finished product and end result. Open to the unexpected, willing to kind of change course, being okay in this not knowing space, right? And many more that you put in the chat as well. But it's about this mindset, and that a makerspace is really just a place where this mindset is allowed to flourish, right? It's a place where people can engage in open-ended activities, and then they have access to learn, to explore, to collaborate, to share. And we think libraries and other community settings are just the perfect place for this type of space, because community and lifelong learning is really what you're all about. And so when we think of making, we think of everything from technology and 3D printing to traditional crafts, right? And so we encompass all of that in what we think of with making, and what you'll see in some of the maker spaces that we're going to talk about. So we also have a broad definition then, as you can assume, of what we mean by the term maker space. So a lot of times when people hear that word maker space, right, they think of a dedicated space. That's the second one on the list there, that there's got to be a room with a closed door that's only for 3D printers and robots and tech equipment, right? And that's your makerspace. And that is one kind of makerspace. When we talk about our toolkit and what we encourage people to build and create, that can take many shapes and forms. It doesn't have to be a dedicated space. That's one way this can come to life. But when we did our project, and we'll talk about that in a minute, and looked at all these libraries throughout the state of California, we saw, hey, their makerspaces sometimes were a multi-use space. Sometimes it was a computer room by day and became a makerspace by night, or it was a room that, there were meals being served in, and then in the evening a cart would roll in and a makerspace, pop-up makerspace would happen, and then that cart would leave and get packed away, right? So there can be multi-use space makerspaces. Different community events became makerspaces too. Some people had fairs or festivals, right? And that became a place for community sharing and making. A maker box program, which was like a physical box of supplies that moved from library to library. We saw this especially in some more rural library settings where they wanted to share the supplies and tools from library to library. So it was a box with everything you needed to run a program that would rotate between libraries in the community. And virtual, we're all living in it now, right? Especially after COVID, but a lot of maker programs and maker spaces can also be online. And that could be another way to reach new audiences. So again, we have kind of that broad definition of who makers are, and we have this broad definition of what a maker space is. And how we kind of arrived to all that in our thinking and doing was part of this project that we had. It was about a 3-year project that was supported by the California State Library. And we selected 10 really diverse libraries throughout the state of California to help them build and create a sustainable community-driven makerspace. And all of these libraries were chosen because they were quote unquote under-resourced, whether that meant they were serving a high needs community, they had low funds, we had one library that literally had one staff member, right? So they might have had really low capacity staffing wise. So they were under-resourced in one way, shape, or another. And what we saw as we went through this process that we're going to talk about today is 10 really unique models for how maker programming can thrive in these communities and thrive and be sustained, right? Which is one of our key things, that it doesn't matter what your constraints, you can create a program that can thrive and be sustainable. So we took all of that learning, we tested a bunch of things with all of these 10 libraries throughout the state, and from that 3-year process created this toolkit. Makersinthelibrary.org is the URL. It's all free to download. Everything on that website is free. It's all funded through IMLS funding and it's freely available to you. But it's a toolkit that has words that kind of take you through the chapters, but it also has really practical tools associated with it too. And so there are actually 21 different tools that you can download directly from the site. They're fillable PDFs, you can fill them in, or you can just use it as inspiration to create your own sheet that you might want to adapt or just get inspired by what these things might lend to your spaces. So it's a bit about the toolkit, and what we're going to do now is talk you a little bit through the process of it, and we're going to actually walk you through the different chapters and phases of this toolkit and give you kind of a highlight of it. But I'm going to turn it over to Pam to start that.
Thanks, Lisa. It's a pleasure to be here and to listen to the whole conference, and I'm just honored to be included today. So thank you so much for having us here. We went to a process that's not necessarily linear. It is one that you can see has arrows going in circles and backwards, but it is definitely a process that's informative and developmental. So whether you had you already have kind of a maker program already or none at all, you could use this process that goes step by step. And we're going to start with the listen and discover will be the first one that we start our session with you. Next slide. And so just so we can have a better idea of who's in the room with us, I'm wondering if you can let us know in the chat, do you have a makerspace program? And now we have kind of a broad definition of that. Do you have a makerspace program or a STEM program, an arts program, a craft program, DIY in your library. A is, yeah, we've got one, and we'll even show you the link to our website. Or, no, we sure wish we did though. Or, we have one, but we had to close it down from the pandemic, or something else. I see a lot of B's. You wish you do. Okay, great. And C, oh, and the ones, some people who had one but had to close down, that you're certainly in a good company. There's a lot of folks all around the country with that. Well, this toolkit is going to be very helpful for the majority of folks who have answered B, because it really was designed with libraries that didn't have a makerspace at all, and we're starting from ground zero. And so here's how we got started with them and did it. Let's go to the next slide. With listening and discovering, if you're really going to do something community-based, it starts with listening to the community, and I bet you agree with that as well. So if you move to the next slide, we will start with people. And you'll notice through our toolkit that people are the center. The makers are at the center. Sometimes you got to remind yourself of that because you get bogged down in the details of budget or policy or just how many hours are there in the day. It's so busy here, but you got to always come back to the people. Are they making? Do they feel creative? Do they have the tools they need? Can they access the things they need to learn and grow? And so some of those people include your staff as well. So this is the staff of Corona Library, one of our libraries from our California project. Incredibly resilient, creative, and they failed a few times and they kept back up on their feet, and we just love working with them. Go to the next slide. So one of the steps in this is to think about who are the makers in the community, and we actually have a tool that helps you map that out. And what we mean by makers, if you look in the broader community or in your tribal country where you are, in your nation or area, are there folks doing science and technology? Maybe or not. Are there folks that are doing education that's related to maker concepts? How about arts and cultural, people or organizations? Are there people who are involved in health sciences or any kind of fixing things, like even an auto mechanic, a bike mechanic, anyone who tinkers or makes things? We encourage, a first step is to just brainstorm and write those all down. Write them on this tool. And then you'll go through and take a look and see, you know what? We actually already have a relationship with a couple of these. Some of these actually come to our library and participate in one way or another. And yet there's others you may think, you know what? We really should reach out to a couple of these. We may be able to work together. We may have similar goals. So this is a first step in just figuring out in my region who is doing makery kind of things and are interested in those same topics. Go to the next step. And then there are tools in there to really do focused listening. And we did this with focus groups. With our California libraries, it was pre-pandemic, and so our libraries organized small group discussion circles. Now, with Zoom, it's possible to do this as long as folks have internet access, which is not always the case, but if they do, you could do a focus group online this way. But there's nothing that really substitutes for looking someone in the eye and having a discussion with them. And we kind of like the dialogue that occurs when there's more than one person in the room. And so we have in the toolkit the tools that make it easy for you. You don't have to invent it from ground zero to invite folks. What do I have to say? How do I invite folks to attend one of these things? We also have the sorts of questions that we think are useful to ask the group. Questions about what do they like to make? What have they made? When do they feel creative? Are there concepts in science or arts that they would like to learn? I would think that in your areas and your tribal missions, library mission to preserve cultural and heritage, of your tribes, you may want to really look into that closely and find out culturally what are the traditions and know-how that are important to folks in the community that they would like to practice, share, and learn. And find out exactly what those are so that those could be amplified or preserved or enhanced by your program. And so we did the focus groups with staff groups, with youth groups, with senior groups, with community partners to find out what the needs were and what the desires were of the community. And there's some guidance in the toolkit to analyze the results of the focus groups. Okay, the next slide. And then once your team has sat down to really listen and discover to what's going on in the community and what people feel about this program. And let me tell you, when you sit down and talk about a potential new Makerspace program with the community, you're not only learning and discovering what people are interested in, those people get excited. They get really excited and want to get involved. And they almost want it to happen immediately. And you know it can't happen immediately because there's a bunch of work to do. But that is really useful. You've already done marketing of a potential program with the potential constituents without even having the program yet. And so that's kind of a remarkable side benefit of doing this kind of outreach. But then you synthesize the results, you take all your notes, you look at what you've got, and you fill out some tools that we've provided that help you really focus what people you're serving, and what the purpose, what need you're trying to address with the Makerspace to get started. And our recommendation is to start smaller and more focused, because the Makerspace can be so much and so big that just try to focus. Let's say it's on youth, or let's say it's on seniors, or let's say it's on partnering with a school and doing early elementary for science concepts. But start with something that you can define in a nutshell, because that will help you gain footing. Trying to do everything for everybody all at once can be overwhelming and get bogged down. So this tool helps you create that focus to get started. All right, next slide. And this is just giving a little taste of how you can really enhance and create that sense of community in a really positive and celebratory way by creating this Makerspace project. Next. I think it's your turn, Lisa.
Unmute myself there. Okay, so we're going to focus next on brainstorm and prototypes. This is the next chapter in the toolkit, the next phase in the process. And as Pam mentioned, we heard time and time again from the libraries that participate in this, start small. When we asked, what's one piece of advice you would give someone starting out and also starting a makerspace? And this is one of the things that kept popping up, start small. So we talked about it a lot and really encouraged people, again, like Pam said, not to just do everything at once, but to take that one kind of little focused chunk and experiment and play around with it a little bit and see what happens, because you might need to change it, right? So we talked a lot about prototypes, just kind of early stage models or concepts of things that you're trying to design. And this picture here is the JFK library, one of the libraries we were working with. They had an old computer room that they were thinking about. They were working with their library administration to see if they could turn into a dedicated makerspace. And so they were just using, as you can see, pipe cleaners and clay to sort of map out, what could this look like? Let's start dreaming, let's start prototyping. So, so this can be with materials like this, prototyping, but also just trying out little programs, oh, well, I really want to do something for this elementary school. Let's just try inviting this one class to come to this one program tonight and give us feedback, right? So just thinking about ways that you can gain audience and be able to test things in a small way before you put a lot of time and money into something. We're trying to, really explore, is this right? Is this the right fit for your community before you really dive in? And so in the toolkit, we give this prototype framework. So it's a tool that helps you think through, like, what is it I'm really trying here, right? What is it? Am I testing maybe it's the day of the week, right? Because you can run a program and maybe no one shows up on Saturday, but everyone would show up on Sunday or vice versa, right? So it might be a great program, but it's just your time of day or day of the week, or how long it is that's preventing someone from coming. You can think about the venue, the target audience, how you marketed it, how you staff the program, how you're delivering it, how you design the space, and even that activity type, right? There's a lot of things that can influence the success of a program. So we sort of lay out different things for you to think about. You can add your own ideas in here, but just to think about, okay, what am I really testing with this? So what are the things I'm looking for? So if I ran this program again and I wanted to change something, so you could mark what you would change and then see if there was a difference, right? And really be able to compare, to record your results. How did it go? What would you like to do next? How did it work this time when I did it with this set of conditions? And how does it work another time when I do it with another set of conditions? And did that change anything? So just helping you to kind of keep a record of those things you're testing so you can make really informed decisions on next steps and how to move forward. And we are big fans of documenting. So it's something we talk a lot about in the toolkit because, and that's why there are a lot of these tools like that to help you document. But even when you're running a small program, to think about taking photos, and that's, not just of the people engaged in the project, but think about taking photos of your setup, how your materials are set up, how long or quickly it took to tear everything down, especially as you think about someone else might need to run this program that's not you, right? Those pictures can be really valuable, how the room was set up, how the tables were set up, things like that. Think about recording the number of participants, to think about reflecting immediately afterwards. This can be really hard, right? When you're done running something, we're all exhausted and we just want to lay down, right, and take a nap. But to spend that 10 minutes after you're done running an event or program to bring everyone together, especially if you have, volunteers that might not be there with you the next day, to just say, hey, how did that go? What worked well? What didn't? What did you notice out there? And to jot some of those ideas down while they're still really, really fresh in your head. And to gather feedback from participants. We're going to talk a bit more about this more in depth in one of the other sections, but we also, when you're thinking about prototypes, and there's some tools and resources in the toolkit as well to think about how you get that feedback again. You did that initial focus group. What are other little ways that you can keep getting feedback and listening again to the audience to see what things you might want to change?
And so you've run your tests, you've figured out what your focus, whether it's from workforce development to just encouraging creative, make a creative arts space, or whatever you've decided to focus on. Now it's time to take the information you've gathered from your community and your tests and really, okay, now we're gonna build this thing. And so we call that section of the toolkit implement, and it has a few different parts to it. And I'll just give you an introduction to those parts. Go ahead to the next slide. And there's a lot of stuff to do in this part. And so we encourage you to have some kind of action plan or project management tool. Now, a lot of organizations, libraries, museums, you may already have a tool that you use in your organization for project management, but just in case you don't, we have a downloadable. It's basically a spreadsheet, but it allows you to write your goals. So we have tactical goals that are they're called SMART goals, which are measurable, achievable, assignable goals that have a time associated with them. So you go ahead and you write down those goals. We recommend having goals in 3 different buckets. First of all, a goal with partnerships. Remember, we are really addressing libraries that are low resource and really concerned about the sustainability of the program. I mean, I would really think any library should do this. Your library will have a greater chance of having a sustainable program if you involve partners in the program. Partners that could be in-kind supporters or financial supporters or a combination of both. So set goals for that, assign them to people to work on, and then physical space goals. Okay, is it going to be an outdoor makerspace, an indoor makerspace? Is it going to be on a cart? Is it going to be in a vehicle? What are we doing here and how are we going to get that pulled together. And then a program goal, which is like, what are we going to do once we have the makerspace? What activities are happening within there? So in these 3 buckets, set goals, set up due dates, set up tasks, and have a shared document where everybody knows, everyone on the team, whether it's just you, and maybe it's only you, or maybe it's a team of 10 people, everybody knows where you're at. What have we gotten done? What do we need to do next? So the action plan is one tool. Again, if you have a project management tool that you use in your library, that works too, but this is one that you can use that we've put together for you. The next slide. Budgets. Of course, it does take money. There are grant funding, especially around STEM, which you may be able to acquire. Maybe there's a generous donor. Maybe with your partnerships you have some money. So we have a budget planner, which is a kind of a really big Excel workbook that allows you to line up what the financial resources are, the buckets of money that you're getting, either from your regular general fund budget or from donations or other sources from grants. And then there's estimated costs associated with a lot of different things that a typical makerspace in a library would have, from furniture to computing supplies and equipment, to tools, all the way to consumable supplies like glue, and yarn, and give you some blank spreadsheets for keeping track of promotional costs for your website or your flyers and posters or whatever else that you feel like you need to do to get people to know about your project. And it's really a place to plan a startup budget. So you know, like, well, okay, I need to have at least this much money in order to get this much stuff. And it gives you a column also to set goals for, well, this is how much it costs, but we're going to try to get that donated. So you can break it up and figure out about how much it's going to cost. And these were all values that were put in early 2020. So when we do a new version of the toolkit, we may need to update those costs, but it's relatively recent, the costs that we have factored in there. Okay, the next slide. So we talked a little bit about like getting that initial work done with planning for it in Implement, and now we're going to talk about like what happens in the space. We want you to imagine that maker experience in the space, all the way from the start of entering the space to doing the creative and exploratory work and sharing work in the space that you're setting up there, and then to the moment you leave, so that you're always thinking about what it's like for the experience of the maker. And can you go back? I think there was maybe one slide before this one, possibly. Oh, okay. Nope, maybe I was wrong. There, that's what I was looking for, the tool. We do have this plan. This is one of our most popular, I think, tools in the toolkit that anybody can use if you're really trying to keep some notes about what activities you're doing in the space and what equipment is needed. What are some of the learning goals around them? It's set up a little bit like a lesson plan, but it also allows you to keep notes on, well, if somebody needs us to simplify this activity, maybe it's a little bit too challenging, or maybe you have somebody who finishes it in 5 minutes and you need to add a level of complexity. You're able to add these notes here about the setup, about the materials. And this is a real part about sustainability of your project, of your program too, because let's say you move, you leave your library and someone comes to take your place, they're going to have a record of what that program entailed, and they'll be able to do it again, and they'll have the notes that you had on how that worked. So we really think keeping track of these things is very much worth the effort in the time that you have. Okay, the next slide. And then this is always a concern and a challenge, but also a joy to staff the makerspace with people who really care and love making. And start out by looking within your own library and just asking, when you're doing that outreach and focus groups, like, what do you love to make? What do you love to make? I love the first picture at the top of this page, the man with the beard, was working in this library shelving books and working at the circulation desk, and they did not know that he had a degree in videography, because it wasn't relevant to his original job when he was hired. But when they developed the Makerspace and found out that he had all of this technical knowledge, he became the person who worked in the Makerspace and really flourished there and loved his job even more than he did before. Similar things happened in another one of our libraries where a retiree was working in this rural library in Southern California, and a similar, very simple part-time job. And then they discovered that she had retired from being an animator at Disney. Well, I know you don't find that everywhere, but suddenly she was teaching 3D modeling to the kids because she had this specialized knowledge. You may not realize that the people right at your doorstep have specialized knowledge to share, and it just takes asking to find out. And oftentimes, if it is their love of the thing to do, that they are more than happy to share it as a volunteer, as a part-time contract kind of situation, or maybe it's somebody you already work with. So just ask and find out what people love to do. And then you don't have to always be an expert to be the staff, because you're all learning together in the Makerspace. So if you don't know how to do something, just express that, let's learn how to do that together. And that is always the maker mindset anyway, isn't it? We're always looking to discover and build knowledge and build experience through trying. Okay, the next slide. And then lastly, we do have information about day-to-day operations and examples of some procedures, some safety protocols, some policies. These are the kind of wonky things that you need to sort out in your library, what age groups are allowed in, and what things will be kept locked for safety and brought out, if there's sharp things or things that get very hot. Safety things about ventilation are very, very important, and electrical supply is very, very important when using certain tools. But we also like to say that Makerspaces do not need to be high tech. They can be very low tech. In fact, they can bring back ancient ways of making things, and that can be equally as exciting. One of our Makerspaces in the Central Valley of California, in an agricultural area, got a community spinning wheel in their Makerspace so folks could bring in roving and spin their yarn. So don't let the high tech be the be all and the end all. Bring back these kind of forgotten, perhaps, technologies so you can discover how they work. And what gets really interesting is when you mash up the old and the new to see what's possible. Lisa, what's next?
Okay, so we are on our fourth step in the process. And as you can see, we're kind of in that circular part. So implement, reflect and refine, amplify and grow. They're all building off of each other simultaneously as you go. But we're going to focus right now a little bit on reflecting and refining your program. So you've got all the stuff you've been thinking about safety and staffing, and now you want to know how it's going, right? You don't want to invest all of this energy into the space and not be going back and checking in with the people you're serving, right? And seeing how they feel about what you're doing. So we have a lot of different tools and resources in the toolkit. But before we do that, I just want to talk a bit, put a question out to all of you. I know some of you don't have a Makerspace, so you can answer this question globally for a program that you might run in your space. But do you currently collect data to inform how your programs, whether they're maker or not, are refined? So always, we never do anything without data. B is often, we regularly reflect, listen, or survey. C, sometimes, only when we have time, right? Or D, we're still working on this part, right? So are you currently collecting data or info? Ooh, I'm seeing a lot of B's, some C's.
Yay.
Great.
Yay.
Oh, an A, all right.
Gotta love it. Great,
thank you. Yeah, we really think that constantly collecting data, whether that's data that just kind of exists from your community and you're taking that data to inform your decisions, or that you're coming up with different ways to evaluate your programming. And so I'm just going to share a couple of the ideas that we provide in the toolkit and encourage you to go there and check out some more. This is by no means the only ways to think about collecting data in your program, but we like to kind of expand the definition of what evaluation is too. So the one traditional way that I think a lot of us think about evaluating a program is with a survey. So we give an example program survey. It's 2 pages long, mainly just to give you an example of how you can ask certain kinds of questions. You're always welcome to use the survey exactly as it is, 2 pages long, or just kind of take some of those questions and say, oh, I never thought about asking that question on a survey, that I might want to do that, right? To kind of pick and choose questions that might be useful to you and your community. So there's an example of the tool here, and you can see, here's an example from the Lake County Library where they were inspired by that tool and then created their own survey that was really unique to the program they were running, which was a creative club. And so they wanted to know what people created, if they learned or trying something new, and what they'd like to create next time. So surveying can be, one way to do it. Sometimes though, people get survey fatigue. They feel nervous about filling out a survey, right? They might wonder if it's going to be anonymous or not. So I just want to talk about different other ways that you can also collect data. And it's something to be just really mindful. You know your community's best, right? To think about what's going to be the best way to collect some information. So just wanted to show a couple other examples of surveys and what that can look like, because this maybe is not what you traditionally think of when you think of a survey. But JFK Library, one of our pilot sites, for example, they were doing some programs with children. And so having the children actually, write out these answers, long answers, was just not feasible. So they created these little emoji surveys, right? So had people draw in how they felt about something, or even circle. You can see on the right hand side, did you enjoy your time in the makery? And you just circle if you're a happy face, a sad face, or somewhere in between, right? And then what would you like to learn? And it says write or draw below, right? So even giving kids a chance, if they don't want to write it out in words, to even draw what they're feeling or what they would like to learn next. So again, to think about different ways that you can do surveys in addition to the more traditional way that you saw on the first slide. Another thing that we want to talk about is self-reflection. It's great, of course, to hear from the people that have attended your program, and we'll talk about a couple other ways you can do that. But like we said before, it's also so valuable to gather the people that you work with and that help deliver these programs together and say, how did that go, right? You can get that feeling, right? Did that go okay? Did that resonate well? We lost interest here, or so you can really talk with your staff members and think about what went well, how you knew it went well or not, right? To think about what indicators are you looking for to tell if things went well or not, and what you would do differently next time. So we have a tool that's a self-reflection log, basically, that you can keep track. It works great with that program planner that Pam talked about. So you can plan out the program and then you log what happens, right? How did it go? You can include any survey or other evaluation you did with it. And then you have this record, right, of what you tried, how it went, and why you made the changes you did. Another fun way to think about collecting feedback is on a talkback board. So these are 2 examples from a Atascadero library. This can be a fun way for people in your community to feed off of one another's answers. So for example, on the left, it just says very open-ended question. What did you think of the program? And there were some Post-its out. And so people could write down on the Post-it and put it up there. And then if I'm another patron, I come up, I can say, oh, I agree with that comment, right? I could just give it a check or a star or a heart on it, or I could add a thought of my own. So it's a nice way for people to kind of feed off of other information. The one on the right is just another example of that. This is an example they did with teens, but just these open-ended, what did you like about this? Would you like to see more of this? Any comments, questions, and people could just kind of add everything in there themselves and feed off of one another's answers and responses. But kind of in contrast to that, I wanted to show a way, because a talkback board then is very visual, very open, right? and you're really seeing everyone's responses, but you might want it to be a little more anonymous. And so a suggestion box can be a great way to do that. This is an example from Contra Costa Library. It's a fun, basically like Rube Goldberg kind of machine that they created, that they wanted to hear kids' amazing ideas. And so kids are able to bring their idea to the library, write it down, they snap it into a little ball, they put it into this crazy contraption machine, and then they watch it go and kind of meander through the castle and up and down, and this little light comes off at the end. And then what's happening is that the staff were able to read these anonymous ideas, right, and bring them to life. I think one of the big takeaways that we want to say for all of the reflecting and refining is that, don't survey just to survey. Don't collect data just to collect data, right? You want to be able to respond to it. And that's what keeps people wanting to continue to give you feedback, right? If they make a suggestion or they're giving feedback or they're giving an idea and they come back a couple weeks, a month later, and they see that change actually materialize, right? And they're more invested in your space, and they really want to keep giving you feedback because they see that their ideas are being valued and that you're really taking them to heart. So there are, again, more ideas in the toolkit, but I'm going to turn it back over to Pam to take us through our last section.
We're going to be speaking now about the last section, which is called Amplify and Grow. And that's about really bringing in new resources and bringing in new people. And so you've gotten this makerspace created. You've got it started. I'm not going to say it's established. It's always in development, I think, because it's about people, right? So people change, people grow. But how can you make it stronger? How can you reach more with this program that you've created? So here's some of the things that we have available in the toolkit. Go ahead to the next slide. There are some things about fundraising in there, and we don't have time to do a whole session about fundraising, so I just wanted to show you an example of one of the things in there. Now, library staff are not always the ones to be doing fundraising. There's often some kind of foundation or Friends of the Library or booster organization to go out and do that kind of fundraising. However, the library, the people running the programs are definitely ones who know the needs, and definitely the ones who have relationships with the people who benefit from the program and also from the community partners. And sometimes you need to be able to ask for something specific. And so we have a draft of a sample donation letter that you could write to ask, let's say for your summer program, and you really need some specific support for a specific need. And so we wanted to help with the wording for that or how you might put that together. And we used examples from some other successful donation letters from other libraries and crafted this that could be adapted for your needs. And so it could be used for in-kind donations or financial contributions or any kind of special effort that your library, or maybe even just the establishment of your initial Makerspace program could get those kind of charter donations from the very beginning. Go ahead to the next slide. In addition to bringing in funds, there's also being able to speak about the program in the first place, being able to spread the word about it. It can be, just as you've noted, like Makerspaces could be anything from high tech to a workforce development skills building program to a craft DIY program to something for children to something for adults. It could be all kinds of things. So what we urge you to do is get it described in a nutshell for what you're doing with the Makerspace in your library. So give it a name and call it something. Now, Anaheim Library decided to put that out to the community and ask them to help name the Makerspace. And so they even had a whole event around that. Let's give it a name, what we're doing here with sewing and art and robotics and those sorts of things. the one other example I have here is the Makery. They came up with that name themselves and then put it out to the community, and a community member developed a logo for them. You're going to find that having a name and kind of an identity to the program is going to help you a lot when you go out and you look for some support for it. You have to be able to decide what it is and what it isn't. So it does put some boundaries around it. So maybe you have a program where kids play with Legos and you're going to decide, well, wait, is that really part of the Maker program or is it something different? And just kind of put some bookends around it, giving it some kind of brand, because it's going to help you promote it and it's going to help you find those allies that can support it and partner with you. Okay, the next slide. And then you're going to, remember that back then when we talked about people and the purpose of the program? Well, you're going to keep your eyes open to that, and you're going to remember, you're going to have some pictures with permission, of course, or you're going to have examples of projects. You're going to listen and write down a quote. Oh, I heard mom say to a kid, like, I'm so proud of you, you know how to do this now, or whatever it is. Remember those golden stories, because when you share those stories of impact, it's what really makes your program attractive and people want to be involved and they want to support you. So you can be creative in whatever way of sharing those stories makes sense in your community. In your community, maybe radio is the best way to reach the population that you're trying to serve. In other places, it might be social media, or it may be in just signs at your library or a little newsletter that you do. Each community has their own favorite channels of communication. I also think it's important to make your program visible in your space. So have examples of what people made, or have pictures on the bulletin board of people making things, especially if your program is one that comes out of a box and then gets put away and people can't see it in between times. So if you have evidence of the program and people can get curious and ask, if you have a 3D printer, for instance, that's dusty in a closet, just have it out near the circulation desk running. And even if you're not really facilitating any kind of education program with it, just have it there and people begin to get curious and ask questions. And then you can say, well, you know what, next week on Thursday, we're going to have a session. Are you interested? So making it visible and sharing the stories later of how people made things for the first time to be printed on a 3D printer and how exciting that was, it's important for building your program. Next slide. And the other point that we want to make in this chapter is about professional development and professional support. And working in your library, whether it's a library in a school or a public library or in a museum program, you can get pretty isolated and not really interact with people outside your institution. And what we're trying to do now is make connections between people who work in library makerspaces across the country. And so our IMLS grant that Lisa and I are working on right now is called the New Face of Library Makerspaces. And we're specifically really emphasizing supporting small and rural libraries that may not have really been involved in the forefront of the maker movement. These big urban libraries that have always kind of been doing this for 10, 15 years. But for those who maybe are newer to it or are less connected to making and the maker trends in making, we're trying to provide a way to share resources, to get mentoring, to train and help one another learn what's possible, and to become a professional network. And so right now we have selected 7 what we call charter members of a collective that we're building. And these charter members are across the country and they're marked on this map that you can see. And half of them are in rural areas and half of them are in more metropolitan areas. And we're building something called a library makerspace collective. And so over the next year and a half, I hope that you'll stay in touch with us as we continue to build. It's basically a new organization that we're building, and we want you to be included in it and have it be a resource, not just for the life of the grant, but we're hoping to have this be a startup of something that will be around for a long time. You'll be able to find the latest news on it at our website, makersinthelibrary.org. I have to give the disclaimer that we are in the kind of infrastructure building, so we're still making it. That's what I'm trying to say. But we wanted you to know about it, and there'll be more information about that coming out, especially late summer and fall. Right, what do we have next? And here's how you can get in touch with us. And we do have a Facebook group called Makers in the Library that anybody is welcome to join, as long as you are somehow affiliated somehow with libraries and making. And there's ways you can ask questions of one another, and it's one way to just get started in making those connections between people. And what do we have next, Lisa?
This is our last slide. This is just our way to get in contact with us.
Okay.
And then at our website, too, makersinthelibrary.org, we have a newsletter. So you can sign up for our newsletter as well. So you'll get updates. We have a blog that we're putting out, tracking progress, and we're always trying to connect people. So please feel free to reach out to us, as our email addresses are on here as well. I know we just have maybe 2 minutes, but we're happy to answer questions, or if someone has something they want to share.
And
feel free to unmute.
Let me just add that, our toolkit is really about, like, how are we going to pull this together, and how are we going to pull it off and make it work. And we've invited our friend Ada from the Public Library Information Exchange, PLIX, who is going to be on next to talk about what kinds of things could happen in the space. How do you facilitate that creative learning experience? And so I think it's kind of a cool mix of two different perspectives, and both important to making this library makerspace work.
Thanks, everyone. It was really great to have you. I think, well, you've got our emails. Feel free to reach out to either of us if questions pop up. I think there's technically a little 5-minute break. So feel free to take your little break. I know Ada's going to get set up. We'll leave the slide up for another minute in case you want to capture any of that information. But we hope that you'll join us. We hope that we'll see you on the Facebook group, or you'll join our newsletter, or reach out to us, because we'd love to stay connected. And thanks for your time.
Yeah.
I can play Zoom transitional music again.
Yes, that would be fun.
Thank you, Lisa and Pamela. That was amazing.
I'm going to stop sharing. So Ada, if you have slides or things you want to pull up, make sure you've got time to
Thanks, Lisa.
do that. Yeah.
I forgot to mention about the conference in Temecula.
Oh yes, and our webinar series, Pam.
I know we didn't mention those things, but oops.
All right, I'm gonna start my share, and I think that's gonna turn off the music.
Oh, I have it playing from my phone right now, so
Oh, nice.
very
All
the
right.
low tech way.
Very low tech. I love it. Let me.
I feel when I share it the other way, it works maybe 60% of the time. But when I share it from my phone, it generally works.
Yeah. Hey, Joe.
Hello.
Okay, great. Thank you, Lisa. Thank you, Pamela. So we are turning it over to Ada and Joe.
All right, thank you, Jess. Hello, everyone. My name is Ada. I'm with PLIX Public Library Innovation Exchange at MIT, and I have and we have with us Joe Misterovich, who is one of our librarian co-designers on a project called the PLIX Rural and Tribal Library Toolkit. So, Joe, could you introduce yourself?
Hi, my name's Joe. I'm a youth services librarian, and I'm in Sparta, Missouri. And I'm happy to be here talking about what I got to work on with the PLIX project.
And we'll also be doing a hands-on activity today. So it's not just going to be us talking the whole time. So be prepared, just a heads up. So yes, welcome. A little bit about PLIX. PLIX is a project of a group called Digital Learning and Collaboration Studio at the MIT Media Lab. And we like to engage public libraries in a range of ways. One of them is collaboratively develop creative STEAM learning activities based on active MIT Media Lab research. We foster a community of public library professionals interested in bringing these creative STEAM learning programs to their libraries. And we host workshops about facilitating creative STEAM activities and also occasionally provide materials for beta testing PLIX activities. The MIT Media Lab is at a research center for a variety of very diverse disciplines. And our community is united by this shared pedagogy of like, people learn best when working on projects they're passionate about, playfully and with peers. This approach of creative learning is the heart of PLIX STEAM programming. And you're gonna hear a little bit more about this. But don't worry too much, we'll give you a link and you can dive in deeper later. So just a little bit of why we work with public libraries. One, you're awesome. And two, we think that Media Lab and public libraries think very similarly about creative learning. We know that like there's so many emerging technologies that are very difficult for people to approach, and we need environments for people to experiment and create with those new tools. And one of them can be a makerspace, as Lisa and Pam have introduced earlier. So Seymour Papert, one of Media Lab's co-founders, encouraged educators to create the conditions for invention rather than provide ready-made knowledge. So as a creative learning facilitator, you don't just take on the role of like the sole broker of knowledge. You can be a guide on the side, steering people with encouragement and feedback. So there's really like, there's no need to be the expert here when you're facilitating creative learning, because there's so many new technologies that like, it's always like, you know, growing, and there's like, we can't all just like be on top of that all the time. And here are our 4 Ps, what we call the 4 Ps of creative learning: projects, passion, play, and peers. And with projects, we learn best when we're actively engaging on projects, generating new ideas, creating prototypes, improving on them. And passion, when we care about something, we work longer and harder, and will persist when we're challenged and learn much more in the process. When we have peers to work with, we share ideas, we collaborate, and we can build on one another's work. And when we're playing, we try new things, tinker, test boundaries, take risks, and iterate. And one of the ways we make space for creative learning is to have low floors, high ceilings, and wide walls. And low floors are welcoming points of entry for people who are very new to a field or a set of tools. High ceilings allow space for growth. It means there's opportunities for become more complex things that can challenge skilled participants, people who have experience with things and want to do something more than the low floors you provided. And wide walls allow for multiple pathways from floor to ceiling. That means there's like quite a wide range of possibilities for all different skills and interest levels. And you can use that for like engaging in people's individual passions and interests. One of our like things we provide for facilitators is these 8 practical strategies for creative learning facilitation. And just in terms of like the PLIX approach for facilitators, the two like very relevant ones are like giving yourself time to grow, because it is a practice. You're like in the process, you're always practicing and learning to become a better facilitator. And also model curiosity and confidence. And just like, it's fine if we fail, but like the journey is something we can celebrate. And you can like ask open-ended questions, model that like you like as maybe like as an adult or as someone who represent like kind of sometimes the person who knows it all, right? That you don't necessarily know everything, that like you can be a peer with your library patrons or learners in these activities. And just kind of a very shameless plug. We have a self-guided mini course that is releasing later this month. And here's a link to pre-register. It's a 4-week email course, and you won't be alone when you do it. You'll engage on our PLIX forum with other librarians who have varying degrees of experience with PLIX. So going into why we're here, there's one of PLIX projects is the Rural and Tribal Library Toolkit project. And we really want to bring this like access of creative STEAM programs to rural and tribal low-income environments, which like libraries in those environments have a variety of challenges and opportunities. And these are what we found in phase 1 of the project. When we worked with 8 librarian co-designers, we identified that there's like, even though they have like, they can be very small places, they're a very trusted civic center. You have a lot of interest from library patrons who are very curious about STEAM and STEM activities, but don't really know where to start. Maybe they have like a tiny library space, but like there can be a lot of engagement in their library for their community because of their rural and tribal context. And just kind of a case study from phase 1, we have one of our librarians who's a library director at Lake Andes Carnegie Public Library in rural South Dakota. She took one of our beautiful symmetry activity, Mary Jo Parker, sorry, just like skipped over. And she remixed it for her library context. So her little town has a population of about 500 people, and plus about 400 people with the Yankton Sioux Reservation nearby. And one of the things they do locally is they make this like Lone Star quilt. And this is not like the one design. There's a variety of designs. And when high schoolers graduate, most of them receive one of these quilts. As you can imagine, that's a lot of work for a very small town. But it's like really nice to celebrate when you're like, oh, I've graduated, and you receive this like sort of local cultural gift from the community. So just like she took our beautiful symmetry PLIX activity and sort of remixed it in like a way for younger residents to learn more about it. And here you have like this paper version of the Lone Star quilt where they can like play around with it and explore with parallelograms and triangles and squares to sort of plan out a quilt. And then later they come together and like create the pieces for it and really like build out this quilt together as a group. So yeah. So from phase 1, we've sort of identified these 4 strategies for remixing PLIX activities. And the one I've just touched on is locally relevant remixes. And then we also have passive programming for when you have like very low staff, or like, you know, just kind of not enough people to run like the activity by itself. So you can have it on a table with table tents, and then check in on patrons who are going through the activity. You can have take and make kits where you sort of, I think many of you may have done this already, where you pack up an activity and people like take it home, try it out, and like sort of report back, as well as extended interaction plans. So if you have a very engaging group who come every week, maybe just like stretch out and explore one of the activities. And so Joe here has done just that, but he's also used pretty much all of these strategies. So, and yeah, and he's part of a group of co-designers in phase 2 of this project. So yeah, Joe, take it away.
Cool, thanks, Ada. Yeah, so I, like I said, I'm a youth services programming specialist at the Sparta Community Branch Library, which is in southwestern Missouri. And so I got involved with PLIX through this rural and tribal toolkit project. And so I did a remix of the spatial poetry activity at my library for teens. So just to give you an idea of where I'm coming from, this is a picture of the library I work at. We're very new. We're about to celebrate our 1-year anniversary this weekend. There we are on a map of Missouri. And we just got added to the satellite view of Google Maps. So there you can see our nice parking lot and the library in white. And next door is good old Dollar General, ubiquitous in all rural towns. Cool. So yeah, in January, PLIX sent me a big box full of supplies to bring this spatial poetry activity that they designed to my library. And so I got all the supplies, which you see pictured here. And then we started having these Zoom meetings with like the folks on the PLIX team, and then with the 20 other libraries that were involved in this project. And so right away, I started learning about, all about creative learning, like Ada talked about, and the great facilitation techniques and the 4 Ps. So I learned all this great background information, and then, like we had these online discussions on the forum and in Zoom meetings with these other rural and tribal librarians, trying to figure out, okay, how are we going to take these awesome activities that PLIX has already designed and bring them to our libraries. And so, like Ada talked about earlier, like we all as rural and tribal libraries have like unique challenges when it comes to bringing any kind of programming, but like specifically STEM programming. So like these were some of the challenges specific to my library. So this project started for me in January. So we still had like pretty strong pandemic related limits on in-person programs. We didn't have any in-person programs. So that was a challenge. I knew I needed to do something outside of like a more traditional in-person event. And also kind of related to the pandemic, we had low patron flow through. So, and this was also, I guess, related to, it being winter. We're usually slower in the winter. We just did not have a lot of patrons coming through. So there would be days where there might only be a couple teens through the library all day. So I wanted to do something that would still work given that kind of limitation. Also, because we're a brand new library that opened in the middle of the pandemic, it's not like we have this like established, established routine of offering STEM programming for any age group. Ada, could you go back to the previous slide? I forget, there was one more thing. Oh yeah, the mix of patrons coming to hang out, and then still some, we have had a lot of patrons that were like just coming in to pick up holds, like teens who would put books on hold online, but they didn't want to like come and hang out because of the pandemic and other things. So yeah, those were the challenges I had. Okay, sorry, you can go ahead to the next one. So given those challenges, I also had some unique opportunities that I wanted to take advantage of. The take and make kits had already proven to be extremely popular with kids and teens. So like my Sparta, the town of Sparta has a population of about 1,600, but we serve kind of like the eastern portion of our county. And we're in the Ozarks, so there's like rolling hills, and there's just like really poor broadband internet access, and in a lot of places there's not even cell service. So given that, patrons are often like coming in and they just want like anything that they can take home to keep them entertained, and that includes like DVDs and books and stuff, but the take and make kits like crafts and coloring pages and origami. So I knew that there was kind of an appetite for anything that folks could take home and keep them entertained. And then I had decided I wanted to offer something for teens, because I have had a small group of teens that was really devoted to the library and like really excited about anything we were offering. So I knew there was appetite for some cool stuff. Also, because of the pandemic, I wasn't doing story times or outreach or anything like I normally would. So I had a little bit more time to work on this like new project and to explore some different ideas. And so many of the supplies and some really great ideas were already provided by PLIX. So much of the work was already done for me. So I was ready to get started. And get started I did. So I started out by, reading through all the great information and resources and ideas that PLIX has on their website. So like spatial poetry is one of the activities that PLIX has designed. And so on their page for the activity, they, go through some like different prompts that you could use to respond to this idea of spatial poetry. But they also showed a lot of examples, which you can see on the left there, of like what people have made in response to this activity. And I was really excited about these like kind of maps with collages. Like I thought, oh, this is like something cool that my patrons will be excited about and that I'm excited about. And then on the right, this is like a screenshot of the PLIX forum, which is also this amazing resource. And this is from the like beta testing process, and there's like 80 something responses to this post. And so when I was getting started, I just kind of read through and looked at what other folks in libraries have done in response to this spatial poetry. And I started to kind of wrap my head around the ideas behind spatial poetry. And to me, spatial poetry is all about, how does language shape our relationship to space? And that can be through like the names of places, names of streets, through maps and local history. And so it's kind of like combining poetry and maps and local history and place names in order to kind of better understand and reflect on and imagine new possibilities for the places that we live. So once I kind of had my head wrapped around these ideas, I was like super excited to get started and figure out how to bring this to my library. So the next thing I did was I started doing some play testing, and play testing is kind of like PLIX's way of describing like just trying out an activity. And like, you know, Ada mentioned the 4 Ps. Well, play is one of the Ps, maybe the coolest of the Ps. And so I started, you know, just playing around with these ideas and with these prompts to figure out like, okay, what's exciting to me and what does it feel like to like try this out, and how can I turn this into like a program in my library. So the first play test thing I did, I think, so on the left, this is responding to this prompt that was on the spatial poetry page, which is street renaming. And so I did this play test. I like traced the shape of the streets in Sparta. And then I was like, okay, I'll choose something that like I care about to rename these streets. So like I really love music. So I was like, okay, I'll rename these streets to honor musicians from Missouri. So I traced the streets and then, you know, kind of colored in the streets I was going to rename and put the labels on them. I tried to work pretty quickly and keep it simple, just so I could get an idea of what it felt like to play around with these ideas. And I thought it was cool. You know, it's a little silly, but you know, street renaming, like even though my example wasn't really deep, I felt like, you know, there's a lot of potential there. Like, you know, if you think about all the cities that have streets named after Christopher Columbus, like hundreds of streets, or other historical figures that like are embedded in these like colonial and like white supremacist histories, like the idea of being able to look at streets and think of new possibilities and honoring different histories with the names of streets, I think is really powerful. So anyways, that was the street renaming playtest. And then on the right is another kind of silly example that I made. So this is responding to a different prompt called a found poem. And so this is kind of like looking at a map. And here I started with a map, which is like a satellite view, and it had the street names built into the image already. And so what I did is I just looked around at the words and just picked out words that I thought were interesting. And Sparta actually has a lot of really interesting street names. Like there's a lot of fruits and trees, and well, you can see dolphin and dewdrop. So I was like, you know, it kind of like sparked some creative poetic possibilities right away. So I just kind of hastily made this like digital collage where I like enlarged the names of the streets, and then I kind of made like a collage poem by taking the names of these streets and turning them into a poem, and like added a little bit of like a local history thing, and then superimposed the train on there. So, and I did this like really quickly in like Microsoft Paint, I think, because like that's a software that's like freely accessible on all of our library computers. So I thought, okay, you know, this is something that kids could do. So yeah, I tried to keep them like playful and silly. Also, I should point out, like, you know, I tried to, like, I wanted to start off with examples that used like local maps. So both of those examples like used maps of Sparta as their starting point. And I thought that was important because like if I'm making these examples and I'm going to show them to patrons, I want them to be able to like look at it and be like, oh yeah, like that's where I live. So, and that maybe is more helpful for them than to see like the examples that other libraries had made where there are other places and maybe they don't identify it or you know, connect with it in the same way. Okay, I got two more examples that I'll show. So these are both kind of like fantasy maps. The one on the left is like, you know, inspired by maps that you would find like in the like inside cover of fantasy novels like Lord of the Rings or Chronicles of Narnia, that like, you know, is a map of this fictional world. So I made a fantasy style map of the library. So it's like based on the floor plan of my library. I thought that would be kind of silly because, like, you know, I know patrons, a lot of patrons that love fantasy books, or they love like Dungeons and Dragons, which has like a similar style in its artwork. And then it would be something that they could recognize, like, oh, hey, that's the library. So I did that online with a tool called incarnate.com. But there's some other, if you look around, there's some other free tools on there. Or like I had patrons doing it just, you know, with paper and pencils. But I thought it, you know, it's an interesting like process of, you know, taking a place that you know and reimagining it through this lens that's this like fantasy, like fictional thing. And I think that's an interesting process, makes you think about place differently, even though it is kind of silly and playful, or because it is silly and playful. I mean, I think these things are important. And then on the right, this is also kind of a fantasy map, but like a different kind of fantasy. This is like, you know, I'm kind of like thinking about like imagining new possibilities in the place where my library is. So what I did with this one is there was a railroad that ran from Springfield, Missouri through Sparta, and Springfield's like kind of the nearest major city, but it shut down like almost 100 years ago. So what I did is I took a map which had like the route of the railroad and the stops, and I traced it onto the grid paper. And then I like marked like, oh, okay, in my like imaginary version of Sparta, what would be like some really cool places I wish were like nearby, and you could ride this like imaginary train to like these different places. So like the library, we actually do have a library in Sparta, but like I added a movie theater, which we don't have, an art museum, a record store, a skate park, and a community recording studio. And so this is also like things that I care about, you know. I'm sort of thinking about like my identity and place, and imagining new possibilities. And yeah, and then I added like text, and I like did like a collage from like magazines with the little images on there. So those were the examples that I did in my play testing. And after I had gone through like making all those examples, I had a better idea of like, okay, how can I, you know, bring this to my library, and what are the things that will get kids excited? So Ada talked about the remix strategies, and I did really use all 4 of them now that I'm thinking about it. But I was focused on the wanting to do take and makes because I knew those were going to be so popular, and then I wanted to have like an in-person component, so that it would be passive. So for folks that are hanging out in the library, like there would be something that they could work on together. And so we have like a whiteboard in the teen department. So I put up a bunch of examples on the whiteboard, and like some text with like prompts. And then on the table in the teen area, I put out a bunch of supplies, like all the supplies that I got from PLIX, and a bunch of like different examples of maps. So like I tried to have a decent variety of maps that were like maybe more hyper local and had like names of businesses and streets and such, or some that were zoomed out, or some that didn't have any names on them. So that way that there were some like different possibilities. And like Ada mentioned, the you know, low floors, high ceilings, and wide walls. So that was something I was thinking. I was like, okay, how can I set this up so there's like a really low barrier to entry, but there's like really wide possibilities. And then I used 3 prompts: found poems, fantasy maps, and street renaming. Okay. And I didn't get a lot of examples back. You know, the take and makes were super popular, but every time I would say like, oh, you know, please come back and show me what you did. Like, I would love to see it. didn't get a lot of stuff back. And but these were two examples that I did get to see. And even though I didn't get to see what kids made, like they said that they were really excited about it because it, you know, connected to things that they cared about, like local history and poetry and collaging and all of this stuff. So, but those are a couple examples of what folks came up with. Okay, so one thing that I thought was really cool about bringing this spatial poetry activity to my library, you know, and the previous Makerspace presentation kind of touched on this too, is like STEM can look like a lot of different things, or STEM programming and making. It's not just like coding and robotics or whatever that, or 3D printing that is maybe thought of as the more like foundational stuff. You know, this whole like entering this kind of like abstract field and thinking about like language and map making and poetry, like these are really abstract ideas, and it allows kids to like have to solve like these really interesting and abstract problems. And that's exactly the kind of thing that you know, everybody will need. Like, you know, as adults, we've probably all encountered like this digital environment that we're in is like ever changing, and the way that we used to, you know, log into our email or you know, like do anything on the internet, it's always changing. There's always updates, and we have to be kind of flexible to be able to you know, work effectively in this ever-changing environment. And I think that building these skills of creative learning and problem solving is exactly what we need in order to survive in that kind of world. And then also, I just think it's so awesome to provide a space for any kind of playful experimentation. And this is kind of cool because it's maybe kind of like subversive play, like teenagers who aren't as interested in like play might get into this and have a chance to do some really creative things, but they might not even realize they're playing. And so I think that's pretty cool. So yeah, okay. So now that I gave you a lot of information about how I brought spatial poetry to my library, I would love to give you all a chance to try out spatial poetry on your own. So the prompt that I am going to give you all is street renaming. And so I showed you the one example that I had done of street renaming. Of course, yours is not going to look exactly like mine. I hope it looks totally different. Oh yeah. So that's the one on the left. So if you have like paper and anything to write with, like that's really all you need to try this out. But if you have like more supplies like colored pencils, markers, that's great too, or scissors, like if you want to collage stuff. Also, if you are on like a digital device, you know, and you want to pull up Google Maps, you could use that as your starting point. That way you have like a map source to kind of work off of. You could even do like some kind of digital collage. So go ahead, Ada, sorry. Yeah.
Just kind of like some scaffolding for doing this activity in wherever you are right now. If you can even like, it really helps to start with a map. So you don't have to sit there trying to like remember the names of the streets near you. This is not a test. You can pull out your phones and be like, oh, what does my like local neighborhood actually look like? And I know this can be different for different people if you've like only spent a year or two in the place you live in now, or like your entire lifetimes, right? So yeah, just kind of like think about like what your relationship is to your like the space around you, not just in your room right now. Well, if you want to do that, that's totally fine. Yeah, Joe, are you gonna say something?
Oh, no, that's great. It is good also because like a map, is like a bird's eye view usually of a place, which is like different than like how we as humans usually see things. So it's like a different perspective.
Yeah.
And yeah, like your memory of street names is maybe not as trustworthy. So it's good to have like a real map to get you started.
Let's take like 10 to 15 minutes to do this because we're short on time, and I'll play some music. And I'm gonna stop my share for now. Oops, here. And if you want to just like chat, speak up, unmute yourself and hang out, that's perfectly fine with us.
Or show on your camera if you want to turn your camera on, show what you're working on.
Yeah. Some action music for your creative activities.
Oh, I'll put a link to that fantasy map creator thing.
I'm curious, this is Pam. I'm curious if folks who were doing this project in your group maybe were in rural areas that actually don't have a lot of streets. And so maybe we're using other landmarks like mountains or rivers or things like that.
Yeah, that's a great idea.
Yeah, that is great. Yeah,
I haven't thought about that.
Yeah.
I'm
I
kind
don't.
of
I.
curious. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead.
I was going to just say I'm curious with the group that's on with us now if they've done anything with maps in their programming at their libraries, if that's something they've tried, and maybe it's a unique approach. I'm not sure.
Yeah, and feel free to share out like in the chat. You don't have to like speak up and unmute if you're feeling shy. I think the last one I did of this was just like, I was very motivated by how hungry I was because it was around lunchtime. And I was like, oh, like my relationship to my local neighborhood at that moment was like, where do I get food? So it was just like, oh, there's like that bakery that has like really good pastries. Or like, oh yeah, there's like this peach tree that is only ripe in August, but the peaches hang over the sidewalk, so you can just like reach up and take one when it's ready. There are some laws around foraging, just so you know. But if you can access it from the sidewalk without like reaching into property lines, then you're all good.
May I ask a question?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah.
Okay, so I drew a map. What else are we supposed to do, or what's the whole?
Yes. Joe?
Yeah. So the kind of prompt is thinking about how your personal relationship to space through like the names of streets or the names of places. So like if you drew a map, that maybe includes the streets that you regularly use, and you write down the names of those streets, maybe think about what do those names mean to you, if they mean anything at all, and what would be like if you could rename those streets, how could they better reflect, your personal identity your history, your, passions and interests and values, and then what would that look like? How would that, change your neighborhood if you, rename the streets to better match your identity? Does that kind of make sense? There's no one way to do it, but that's kind of the ideas to start with.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Whoa, an edible walk.
Yum.
That's really cool.
I love that. I think like I'm very turned off by like whenever people ask me to go hiking, and I'm just like, I'm just walking on this route that other people have designated. And so I was just like, if I framed it as like I'm going to look for food out in the wild, that's much more appealing to me.
They just did a program in my library district that was like foraging in the local area, but I did not participate. But I think there are some interesting things to eat.
There's some ideas that are coming to mind too, are the sequence in which, when you are navigating a road and using a map, there's an order to how you experience it. And based on the order that you put things in, and that's with writing poetry too. What order am I going to put these words in? If I change the order, it changes the meaning. And so if you're creating a journey in your map, what is when you made those intentional choices of what turn you're making on this road, what one you're going on next, it could actually develop a narrative potentially. Maybe you're on a journey towards something.
Yeah, that's super interesting. Yeah, I mean, that makes me think about how, if you do have like a regular daily commute, if you change your commute or like drive down different streets or walk down different streets, like it can really change like how, you feel, how you are like going to start your day. So yeah, thinking about, I guess, like streets as a sequence is kind of interesting. Yeah, and then related to like poetry as sequential.
Are you able to see me?
Yeah.
I don't know. Are you able to see my drawing?
Yes.
A little bit, maybe if you hold it a little higher. Oh, cool.
Can you speak again? That way, like we'll have the big speaker screen. Oh, wonderful.
I love it.
Read the letters. I mean
It's hard to see the text. Do you want to tell us about it?
Okay, so it says, I would not change the road name. Mission Road is perfect. I live on Mission Road. I work on Mission Road. I am always on a mission.
Oh, yeah.
That's so great.
I love it.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Lovely.
And I just wanted to pipe in. I'm so sorry if I'm hijacking the discussion, but I wanted to go back to Dessa's comment in the chat, and I want to know, like, how did the children who participated in that edible walk, or is that something that you've done, or something that like you're inspired to do after this workshop? You can type in the comment. You don't have to. I'm sorry if I'm putting you on the spot, Dessa. Okay, sorry.
I love the question though, and I love the fact that Dessa, this is something that you can think about with almost any project in your makerspace. The idea of going on an edible walk in the neighborhood with kids alone is a fantastic idea, but it levels it up to then take it and make a map of it. and you're building literacies by having to translate the space to a diagram of the space. That is scientific knowledge and skill building right there, which is, it's cool. And then they can share and see how each other did it differently. So amazing. I like this project because it is so adaptable into so many different contexts. And I think you can see that you could actually create a poem out of it, or you could create an artwork out of it, or you could delve into history in it. There's a lot of different ways you could look at it.
There's also, related to the edible walk, there's another PLIX activity called Urban Ecology that folks might want to check out too. It's like a different activity, but it deals with some really cool ideas.
Yeah, I've been inspired lately. I'm reading this, I just read this book called Braiding Sweetgrass, and probably many of you on this session have already read that book. But the idea of bringing in these, having science, but having your indigenous cultural perspective side by side, they don't always come from the same perspective. I don't need to tell you that. But to make the truth of all of those viewpoints present in what you're doing in your libraries is really important. So the work that you can be doing by making makerspaces possible in your tribal libraries, I just want to honor that effort. That is worth it. And I really hope that you're able to bring some of these experiences to your communities.
Thank you, Dessa. She just replied in the comments. Some of the kids tried all sorts of non-edible. Not so fun for parents, but I can see where that can kind of like tie into like cultural work, like what Pamela was saying. So thank you so much for sharing and elaborating with the group.
I just wanted to note also that I didn't mention it when we did our session at the last hour, is that Ada and I are going to be at the annual conference in October, and we're going to have a workshop. So based on the toolkit and actually doing some of these activities hands-on. So if you're interested in just digging a little bit deeper and plan to attend the conference in Temecula, we're going to be there, and we can't wait to share some of that with you.
Awesome. I think that it's going to be like a whole new level once we're in person and face to face, and it'll be great. And so we're getting ready to like get booted out of this breakout room. I'm so sorry. Ada, Joe, do you have any last 15 seconds?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Tomorrow we'll do some resource sharing. So I hope that you guys can join us again at the end of the day and participate in an interactive activity.